Here we go. We're gonna get kicked off with the bonus session on tone amplifiers, guitar, electric guitar settings, and loop pedals. So you're probably noticing I have the acoustic guitar. Why do I have this one? We're talking about amplification. Well, the very first thing I want to discuss or tell you about is what is tone. Okay, tone is when you have a sound and the sound changes in a certain way. So, for example, this is one tone and this is a different tone. You never hear the clear difference between those. When you strum the string closer to the bridge here, it makes it much brighter. That's a term that you use when you're describing tone. Brighter, darker. This is kind of warmer, I might call that warmer if you play it up here by the bridge. Or sorry, away from the bridge by the neck, it's warmer. By the bridge, it's brighter. You get some really jangly, strange sounds there, like Pink Floyd often have a kind of sound like that by the bridge. So that is very useful to understand your basic concept of tone changing on guitar, which you can then apply to the electric guitar. So let me put this down. Grab the electric. So with the electric guitar, let's talk about tone on the electric guitar. The same thing happens if you play the string at different places, up there by the neck or down there by the bridge. The same thing happens as with the acoustic guitar. The tone changes, and it changes because of the way the string, basically the distance between where you're plucking and the bridge is changing the tone of it, which is, we won't get too into the physics of it, the like string vibrating at different ways, but you can just take it as that tone changes depending on where you play it. With the guitar, electric guitar, you have the added ways of changing tone, which are the pickups. The pickups, what they do is they do what their name is. They pick up the sound. So when you strike the string, this pickup is picking up the vibrations here, and the vibrations are traveling through the lead, the wire, and it's going into the amplifier and it's getting louder in the amplifier. So you can imagine now that pickups, depending on where they're placed, affect the tone just the same way as your picking does. Yeah, you with me? So if you pick it here, but you've selected this pickup, to some extent you're changing the trebly sound. You're making it more warm by picking up the sound here, and vice versa. If you play it here but you use this pickup to pick up the sound, then it's going to make it more trebly. So we'll talk about why you might want to do that in a sec. Question in from Con's asking, are the pickups mics? That's a good question. Microphones are a little bit different to pickups, because the way that microphones work is they pick up vibrations in the air. So if you have a microphone and you talk into it, your talking goes through the air, the vibrations go through the air, and the microphone picks it up. With the pickups, it's not really picking up like sound. Like if I click my fingers around it, that's not affecting these pickups. Only the string vibrating very near. It has to be, it's like more like a kind of magnetic field, I think, is the way it works. So it's just picking up the string vibrations very near these pickups. They're like coiled, definitely some kind of magnetic effect there with those. So it's a little bit different from microphones, but they work in a similar way. If you hit it harder, they'll pick it up and make it louder, and if you hit it quieter, it'll pick it up, but it will be quieter, less. So if anyone else has a question, fire it in there in the chat. So we have this thing called a signal flow, which is going to help you understand what happens to the signal. It starts with the string. So if I have no volume on at all, when I hit the string, it starts vibrating and it makes a sound, just like your acoustic guitar does. But it's very quiet. It's very quiet because the electric guitar is a solid piece of wood. Okay, the acoustic guitar is louder because the body of the guitar is vibrating and it's a hollow chamber, so it amplifies the sound. It's like a natural way of amplifying it. But then in the 20s and 30s, they started to invent electric guitars and amplifiers. They realized they could make the sound much louder by using electricity. So initially the first electric guitars were like acoustic guitars that could play louder, because if you were playing with trumpets and horn sections and stuff like that, and you had acoustic guitar, they're not going to hear you play. Even if you're smashing your acoustic guitar, it's still going to be way, way quieter than a trumpet player playing really loudly. So guitars couldn't really compete with horns back in the 30s until they invented amplification and electric guitars. And then they started on a journey then where I think in the 50s then they invented like the electric guitar that's solid body, like this one, solid body. So all of this, nearly all of the sound is coming from the amp. Not much acoustic sound at all, but you have a lot of control over the sound. So how does the sound get controlled? Well, there's, on most guitars, 2 knobs. Some of your guitars might have 3 knobs, and they nearly all have a selector switch. Now, some guitars don't have any selector switch because some only have 1 pickup. Like Samuel's last guitar just had the 1 pickup, so you didn't need a switch. And some guitars have 2 tone knobs and 1 volume knob. The volume knob is the most important one. It's the one that's highest and nearest to the pickup most of the time. So the volume knob just controls the volume. If I turn it all the way to the right, that's full. If I turn it off, it's very quiet. Leslie has four knobs there. Some guitars might have more than 1 volume. It actually gets a little bit confusing. Oh yeah, the Les Paul style guitars. You have to really kind of do a bit of work to figure out which knob is controlling which. If you have 4 and 2 pickups and 4 knobs, then you'll have 1 volume for 1 pickup, 1 volume for another pickup, and 1 tone for each pickup as well. You have to do a bit of playing around to figure out which one is which, and for ages it's like confusing, but you can figure it out. So you have to do trial and error. Turn them all down, no sound. Turn 1 up at a time and see what happens. Okay, so here we go with the volume's up full, and the other one's the tone, which if I turn that all the way down, can you hear how dark that is? That's very dark sound. As I turn it up, it gets brighter. So it's like what a wah-wah pedal does. You know, a wah-wah pedal, like in Jimi Hendrix, and it goes waka 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 waka. That's the same thing that's happening. That's just doing that really fast. So if you turn the tone knob really fast, you can hear the sound going wah 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 like that. Which is like similar effect to what happens when you actually do that with your mouth. When you go wow 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 wow, you're changing the sound based on the shape of your mouth, which is changing the tone of the sound. So far we've described 3 different ways to change the tone of the sound, with where you pluck the string, with which pickup you select. We'll talk about how to do that in a sec, and using the tone knob here. Lots of control over the sound. Let's talk about the selector switch. This guitar has a 5-way selector switch. It's very common to have 5 all the way down. I've selected this pickup, which is the more trebly, jangly pickup. So if I turn the tone knob all the way up and have the selector switch all the way down, I'm at like maximum jangly. It's very, very, very kind of bright sound. But if I'll go to the extreme other setting. I'll turn the knob all the way up to the top. Now it's this neck pickup only, and I'll turn the knob all the way down. Do you hear how different is that? Obviously, you can hear a huge, huge difference in the sound. Here's Carl. So it's like almost underwater, kind of muddy. And quieter as well, actually. So they're the extremes. And everything else is just somewhere in between those two. Really bright and really dark. So you might be thinking, why would you want to use the really dark sound? Well, sometimes you would. It's good for jazz. If you wanted to have a nice kind of jazzy sound, you might go for that. But if you're playing like a rock kind of Jimi Hendrix solo, you probably wanted more on that kind of full treble sound. So it's much subtler in between. If you go one selector switch up, then you're going to hear a mix between this pickup with a little bit of this pickup, isn't it? So you can hear the difference between that and one. With this one, it's mixed between the two. This is like an equal mix between each pickup. So it's more in the middle. This is more of a middle type of, not as trebly. It's got kind of it's a full sound, nice in the middle. You could roll off a bit of tone. That's the one more selector switch up. It's maybe splitting these into just one. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a thinner sound. And then all the way up, only this one, the neck pickup, that's the extreme. Okay, so question in from Lisa, what does a humbucker do? This is called a humbucker when you see that it's like two pickups joined together. So this kind of pickup is more modern than just one of them on their own, which is called a single coil pickup. So when you have two of them together, it's louder and cleaner. If you wanted to play kind of modern sounding metal or anything other than kind of vintage rock sound. If you want a vintage rock sound like 60s rock blues, then you want just single coils because it's more of a vintage sound. I've heard humbuckers cleaner and louder. Yeah, that is the difference there. So if I do nothing but select this between that, this is the humbucker setting, and one down, it's just one of these, not both. Can you hear the difference? It's subtle, but it's a little thinner with that setting. So that's all of the tones, that's all of the controls on the guitar. I would rarely use the middle setting. Though, let me say it this way. There's no right or wrong with how to use those. It's just, it affects how the guitar sounds, and you try to use it in a way that you like the sound. If you watch guitar players, your favorite guitar players, whoever they are, if you watch them playing, most of the time you'll see that they do change the sound quite a lot when they're playing. Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, all those guys, they're Jimmy Page, all those guys are in the middle of a solo even, they'll be playing and they'll be playing up here, and then they maybe like switch it with the, change it. They're like constantly changing the tone as they play, because as they play in different parts of the neck or different parts of the solo, they're looking to accentuate and use the guitar tones that suit that part of their solo or that register that they're playing in, high or low. So one good approach that works is if you're playing up really super high up here, then you could use more of this pickup. No, the other way around, sorry. This pickup in the middle is gonna make it not so squeaky. If you're playing up really super high, it's gonna be quite trebly anyway because it's so high. So you may as well use the neck pickup to take a bit of the shrillness off the notes. It's still shrill because they're so high, but if you had it down on this pickup, it would be, oh, there it was. Yeah, see, it's really, I never play up there. But if you do the neck pickup, it's kind of hard to tell the difference, but if you're playing notes up there, you're probably going to want to have the selector switch up there, so you're on that pickup. Whereas if you're playing down really low here, then it's the opposite. It sounds a bit better using this pickup if you're playing really low notes down here. Because if you're using this pickup, these notes are going to be dark anyway, and you're using the darker, warmer pickup. So it's probably might be too muddy if you're playing really low notes and you're using this pickup. Does that make sense to everybody? Throw a question in if you have one. So that is the how to use the controls of the electric guitar. Selector switch selects the pickup. The tone changes the tone coming through. Yes, that is like affecting the sound after the pickup picks it up before it leaves and goes into the amp. So you're going to see that on the amp there is again tone settings. It's like different stages of the signal path. There's a signal flow starting from the string when you strike it, going through the controls, the pickups, and it's like an equalization pickup. It's like a way to change the tone of the sound before it even goes in the amp. You can roll it off a bit or turn it up. So a couple of questions. Nadia says, would you say that pickups to an extent has a function as a bridge too, to shorten the frets? Not really. The bridge is stopping the string, so it's providing the end of the string, but the pickups don't change the pitch in any way. That's what changes the pitch of the sound, is like you're shortening the distance of the string. When you move your finger up, this distance of the string is getting shorter, but the pickup is changing the tone, not the pitch. So that's the difference between tone and pitch. And then Sinead asks, if I record the loop pedal on one tone channel, how can I play over it with a different tone? That's a very good question, and we'll look at that when we get to the loop pedals in a little bit. And Rod asks, what's the essential difference between the different types of humbuckers, DiMarzios, etc.? There's lots of different types of pickups. There's two different kinds, active and passive. Most guitars have passive pickups like this one. They just work. They don't need batteries to make them work. Active pickups need batteries. You need to put a battery in your guitar, and that battery provides more juice, more signal, so they're generally louder. Although from what I understand, they're very specialized. If you're not gigging, you probably don't need active pickups, and if the battery runs out mid-gig and your sound goes away, you don't want that. So most people are happy with passive. Then what's the difference between all the different passive ones? It gets into very technical things about how they coil the wire inside the pickup, what kind of material they use for the wire. You know, there's a whole field of like boutique pickup makers these days. Actually, Kiesel, this guitar company, started off as pickup. They just made pickups before they made guitars. They started making pickups, and then later on they started making guitars. So their pickups are pretty good. These are the first really good pickups I've had. So before, I just had the standard ones that came with the guitar, but this guitar comes with really good ones because they are really good pickup makers. So they have differences of tone, subtle differences in them, all the different ones, and you'd really have to kind of hear them side by side to compare them. It gets into very, very subtle differences, I'd say. So it's like one of those things. Can you hear the difference between a guitar made of mahogany and a guitar made of some other kind of wood? That gets into very controversial territory where some people believe there's practically no difference that you can hear. The pickups are going to provide more difference in sound than that, but it's still, let's say if you get a guitar off the shelf, like around €500-600 guitar, it will come with standard pickups, and if you wanted to upgrade those, you could get new ones that where the pickups themselves cost 500 or 600, as much as the whole guitar. And when you put them in, or you get someone to put them in, you'll hear, oh, it sounds much clearer, cleaner, crisper. You'll hear that the sounds are better from better craftsmanship and better materials. They're the two things really. So hopefully that explained it. But if it's not clear, just shout and I'll keep explaining. Any other guitar questions? So we'll move on to the amp section. So here we go. At the moment, I'm plugged into this amp. I'm going to show you a few different amps. So this is a little Boss Katana Mini. And on all amplifiers, there are 3 sections. The amplifier is divided into 3 sections. Maximum. Some of them might have less, but they'll only have 3 sections of knobs. One section is the input section, where you control the input settings. One section is the equalizer or tone section, where you control the tone. And one section is the effects, where you control the effects. So I'm going to show you 4 amps if we have time. 4 amps, and they all have these 3 sections. This is a very small amp, it costs around €100, and it's about 5 watts, very quiet amp, but good for practicing. So one thing that's very useful is to understand the signal flow. The signal is flowing through different things and going along until it comes out of the speaker, and that's what you hear. When I hit the string, the signal starts in the string vibrating, like the acoustic sound is the very first thing. And then it flows through the pickups, through the tone function of the pickups, flows out of the lead into the amp, and this amp is arranged very cleverly the signal flow goes like that in a line. Most of the amps are like that, but some aren't. So the signal comes in here in the input, and the next thing is this, and the next thing is this, and the signal is like flowing that way. Very fast though. But that's good to kind of get your head around what's happening to the sound. So the very first thing is gain. Gain and volume. Those two are very similar. They're to do with the amount of the signal. You can make the amount of the signal more, it will be louder, or the amount of signal less, it will be quieter. Gain is the input signal. So it's affecting the amount of signal just right as it comes in. It's the very first thing to make that less or more, the amount of signal coming in. Whereas volume is then the amount of signal that goes out. So it's like 2 stages of the signal. why would you want to have two stages? Well, think about it like this. If you wanted to, let's turn the volume right down. I'll turn the gain right up. Can't hear anything because the volume's right down. But if I turn the volume up a little bit, it's very hot. It's distorting a bit as well, but I might want that. I might want a bit of distortion. Put that there. So the electric guitar, you know, is a big thing about it is this distortion sound. When the electric guitar was a new thing, amps were made and they had this byproduct of distorting, which they didn't want it to distort. They just wanted to amplify the sound, make it louder. But because of the way amplifiers work, you could turn up the gain stage. You could turn up the input signal until it was breaking up in this way, distorting. And people liked that. And that's how distorted guitar sounds came into use and people liked it. But that's totally like a happy accident that, like, you know, they didn't intend that for that to happen. So you can still do it that way. Most amps have these different settings. That's a good question, Sinead. So if you can see that, it's very tiny, but you've got clean, crunchy, and brown, really heavy distortion. So this one, oh yeah, my God. See, it's like total distortion, just like. That's the most distorted setting it can go. That's turning the gain stage up like to a really high setting. But even if I put it back on clean, the clean setting, it's still distorting because I put the gain all the way up and kept the volume low. It's going to distort. If I put the gain down and the volume up, then I'll get a nice clean sound. Like I'll play clean sounds. That is how gain and volume works. That's probably the most important thing about amplifiers to understand. Sinead asks, how do you balance between using volume on the amp versus on the guitar itself? That's a very good question, and there's a few different approaches to that. Some people like to always keep the volume very low on the guitar and have most of the volume coming out of the amp. They just like the sound of that. It's a slightly different sound. There's a danger there, though, if you then turn it up by mistake, or you'll be really, really loud and you might blow out your windows or someone's ears who's nearby you. So I don't recommend doing that. I would say the way I do it is I keep the guitar volume all the way up and I get the sound that I want from the amp. That sounds good. And then I can just control the sound. If I want to turn down, I just use the volume on my guitar because it's handier. It's right there. You can just turn the sound off when you don't want it to ring out and turn it up when you want your full sound. But there's different ways to do it, and there's all the in-betweens as well. Nadia, or that's Noreen asking, is that metal on my amp? Yes, there is. Yes, all the settings on the Spark amp are all different levels of distortion. So we'll have a look at those in a bit. So moving on with this amp, we've got the EQ section, which is bass, middle, and treble, which is pretty much the same as, there's no difference between bass, middle, and treble. And when I was playing the acoustic guitar, going like bass, middle, treble, it's just changing the sound in exactly the same way. It's like there's a treble or high frequencies and bass is low frequencies, and it's like shading the sound, taking off. You can take off high frequencies. I'll give you two examples. So this one will take off the high frequencies, turning down the treble, and I'll turn up the bass, and I'll leave the middle in the middle. So this will be a very warm sound. Now, if I was playing jazz, I'd want that. That's something rattling there. Okay, so very nice and warm. If I wanted a trebly rock sound, I would turn the treble right up, turn the bass down, maybe a bit higher on the middle. These are quite extreme to show you the difference. Really trebly now. I'm going to turn the pickup to this one, and now we have super treble. That sounds like a clanky metal piece of metal. It's crazy. So trebly. It's hurting my ears. Turn it off. Okay, so the last setting is the effects. The last section is the effects on this amp. And we only have one effect. We have delay. There's only one effect. It's a tiny amp. Delay. This is the time of the delay. So, and the level of the delay. So if I turn the level up full and the time up full, there we go. It's got delay. If we turn the time down, it's faster. Really fast. That's the delay. And that is that amp. Katana Mini. Let's move on. I'll show you the orange next. Orange has two input, or it doesn't have two inputs. It's got one input, which is over here. Many times people plug into the headphones by mistake, and then there's no sound because you're plugged into where the headphones are supposed to go. So it kind of starts here. It's the opposite flow from the Katana Mini. It starts at the end on the right side and flows to the left. It goes through the gain. Overdrive is another stage of the gain signal. So it's like two stages here. We've got gain and overdrive and volume at the end. So you can have even more distortion. This one has no distortion switch, so it needs to have more control over the overdrive. The other ones kind of, instead of overdrive, they have a switch to change the overdrive settings. I'll turn this on. Noreen's asking, why would you want to have that delay sound? Because if you're the Edge, you want to have delay on your guitar. I should have demonstrated it more of a U2 song, but it sounds cool in certain settings. That's why. I'll show you on the Spark. So with this setting, we've got kind of a trebly sound. Oh, this isn't bouncing. Very trebly there for the this setting. We'll put the gain down and the overdrive up. This would be how you would get the distortion sound on this amp. Put the volume down so you don't blow off your ears, and then we'll put the overdrive up full, the gain up to half, and then the volume. And that's distortion there. Oops. Nice and natural kind of distortion. This is an old style amp. It's a modern amp, but it's an old style amp. There's no reverb or effects, just the gain signal flowing through. Does overdrive means it goes to 11. You've got it, Dara. That's it. Goes up to 11. Loud and crunchy and nice. That's a very simple one, so we'll put that back and move on. We've got this Roland next. It's quite a popular amp, the Roland Cube. There's many kinds. So we've got this input on the left-hand side. Then we've got gain first and then volume. So we've got the input section. Well, it's really like input and output. Same as before, gain and volume. Also the switch for distortion with the color coding. So green is clean and then orange is, what's this called on this one? Crunch and lead. Crunch is orange and lead is red. It's the same as the other amps. Ooh, Oh, it's quite a loud amp, this one. Nice. So we'll put it on clean. Okay. And then we have the equalizer section with the bass, middle, and treble, same as before. And we have this funny effects knob on the cube. It's like, it's got a couple of effects on it, this one. So let me show you how that works. It's got delay on the left side and reverb on the right side. So if you want delay, you select the delay by putting the knob somewhere here. Less is down there and more is up there. So if you have this delay, that's why you might want to have the delay sound, because it kind of, it's like an extra rhythm in the music, the delay. You could change it, have more or less. Oh yeah, that slows it down as well. Kind of in dub music, they started with the delays. Cool, I love delays. So that's what's the delays? Oh yeah, and on the other side you got the reverb. Reverb is the sound that what you hear in a big room. If you clap in a big room, you'll hear reverb. You hear that? So with no reverb, it's like dry. That's full reverb. If you turn off the effects, it's dry. Like it's dead. Kind of unnatural. There's always reverb on sounds all the time. So it's like you can't even hear the reverb in the room you're in if you talk, but it's there. And you can only notice if you're in a very dry room that, like, if you ever go to a studio where there's sound treatment on the walls, so there's no sound bouncing off, it will sound really weird to you. You'll be like, what's really weird? There's no reflections in here. It's kind of interesting. So reverb is like artificial reflections added to the sound. Very easy to overdo the reverb, and it starts to sound terrible if there's too much reverb on everything. Everything's very no definition then. So you have to be a bit careful with reverb. It can sound really cool at first, and you're like, oh, put on, splash on loads of reverb, it'll be great. And then it kind of muddies up the sound and gets it all, every note blends into everything else. Okay, that is the cube. And now one more amp, the Spark. This is the Positive Grid Spark. Oh, you can't see it. So this one is kind of the most modern version of the amps. It has the most amount of settings, and it is quite powerful, lots of effects in it. So we have the input here, but in this amp it doesn't flow in one direction like that. The input's over here, but then it flows this way, and it's got a master and an output, which is a bit confusing. So master usually means master volume, same as output. There's really little difference. They're just two ways of controlling the volume output. Gain is the input, mid, bass, middle, and treble is the EQ section. And then here we have the effects section. There's three effects: modulation, delay, and reverb. Modulation is this. Oh, let me turn it on. So this is quite a nice loud amp. Wait, here we go. Turn the modulation up. because the old put the wrong wire in trick. Now we're plugged in. Ah, now you can hear it. So first I'll turn the reverb and delay off and you hear the modulation only. So this is the modulation. You can hear that. Oh. Let's leave that like that. It's kind of like a flanger. It's hard to get the amp in the screen. Okay, there you can see it. That's modulation. Let's turn up the delay. Couple of questions there. I'll get to those. So Noreen asks, is reverb what happens in the body of the acoustic? Yes, actually it does happen there. That is a good point. But it's what happens when the sound gets diffused in the room. But if you put your ear to the acoustic, if you put your ear to the sound hole and tap the guitar, you will hear like a reverb sound, like as if you're in a big room and you clapped. You'll hear that reverb. So yes, it does happen. It's like a chamber that's making the sound reverberate. So that's a good point. And Lisa asked, what's a tube amp? Well, a tube amp is an old style of amp where the inside there's these vacuum tubes, and that's how the sound gets amplified, by being passed through these vacuum tubes as opposed to through transistors. All of the amps I'm showing you now are either transistor amps or modeling amps, where it's all digital. It's like a computer. This is a modeling amp, so inside here there's just computer chips making the sound different ways. And from this point on, probably the Katana and this are really good sounding amps, and they're all done with modeling, so it's all going that way. It's all computer chips instead of anything else. So that's what tube amps are. Sinead asked, I heard you should keep master up high. Is that a good idea? It is if you want to play really loud. So I think, I don't know, if you're playing at home, there's no real benefit to keeping the master up really high. You can just keep the master at any point you want to get a good sound. Midway is fine, or 3/4, as long as you're not blasting your ears off. But on your Katana, you've got that setting for different wattages, so you can keep it at a low wattage, and that means you can, yeah, there is definitely a different tone between the master volume and the different volumes all affect the tone. They do. So it's just like when we put the gain up really high, you hear distortion. That's actually the tone changing and getting distorted. So there is overlap when you think about it. Volume and tone and effects, that all overlaps in the concept of distortion. You've got a signal where you increase the signal volume, and then it gets so high it starts distorting, which affects the tone, and that also is like an effect, distortion. So all the concepts are interlinked. Piran asks, can you control the spark with your phone? Yes, there is an app on the phone where you can control the amp. Where's my Spark amp? So I've got this app, Spark Amp, and I can connect it to the amp, and I can just dial up sounds and go, I want this sound, press a button on the phone, and it's pretty cool. I don't really use it that much, but it shows you all the sounds you can have. Pretty cool, the Spark amp. These are not too expensive either. I think they're like about 250 to 300 euro, I think. But I won this one. Wow, it was like amazing prize. Not for doing anything, just won it out of luck. So we can put the reverb up and have like a really reverberated sound on the Spark amp. So much effects, you can't hear the notes. So if you want to play notes, there's no point in having so much effects. But if you want to play textures like it's more for atmospheres, atmospherics. There's no point in having lots of delay and reverb and modulation if you want to play like a blues or something, or go like. Then you want to, you know, sound with definition. Here we have a setting for all the different kinds of overdrive. Well, there's even acoustic and bass, clean, glassy, crunchy, high gain, and metal. So in the metal one, that's really, really loud distortion now. Super lot of fun sticking up the distortion. So that's the Spark amp. I'm going to put that down now. Piran asks, what mid-range amp would you recommend? The Spark amp is really good, and it's kind of mid-range. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. There's a lot of options, but either a Boss Katana, I think a Boss Katana or a Spark. Those two are really good modeling amps that do a lot of different sounds, and they're not high-end amps. They're not very expensive. So that brings us to the loop pedal, which is this there. Can you see it? There. Okay. So the loop pedal basically allows you to record something through, it comes out of the amp into the loop pedal, gets recorded, and then you can hear it playing over and over again. So Sinead's question earlier was about the yes, if you record the loop pedal with one tone, then you want to play over it with a different tone. This is how you would do that. So first of all, let me get, you plug the guitar, this is the guitar lead, it's going to be plugged into the input of the loop pedal. So this is the input of the loop pedal, plug in there. Then this is the output of the loop pedal, and that goes into a bit messy. Goes into the amp. Okay, so now I'm set up. I've got my guitar. Okay, I'm gonna just go for a clean middle sound. Okay, and here's something. If I press the loop pedal, I recorded something earlier. So if I press that, that is something I recorded earlier. It's all of me. So I can play over it. fun for ages playing over that loop. I'm gonna hold the button down here. That if I hold the button down, it erases it. It's gone now forever. With the loop pedal, you don't care about saving stuff. Just record it and then you get rid of it. So let's see, what will I do? I'll try and do a like rocky, distorted riff. I'll put it on crunch. I'll put the okay, the spark is on crunch. Put the treble up. So I'm gonna record. Oh yeah, I just realized it's not gonna record like that. Yeah, to do that, Sinead, you have to have an output from your amp into the loop pedal. It's much more complicated. So you can't do that in the normal setup of the loop pedal. If you record, it's just gonna record the guitar into the loop pedal and then come out of the loop pedal into the amp and make it all distorted. So you can still do it. We'll do it and see what it sounds like. It'll sound like. So that's the loop. Everything is going to be distorted. The loop, what you're playing over it, everything's coming out of the loop pedal into the amp and it's all getting distorted. It's not possible to have the loop distorted and the guitar clean unless you do it a different way, which is no, you can't do it with that amp. You need to have an amp that has a separate output, and this amp doesn't. But yes, you can change the tone on your guitar, exactly. We'll try and do that. So this time, a different loop. If I play that loop now, I took the distortion off the amp. So that's playing the guitar with much more treble, and the part that's playing out of the loop was much more warm neck pickup sound. So you can have those two sounds, which works quite well, going over each other. There's loads of other stuff you can do with loop pedals. You can start layering up the loops. I'll try that. There's a little demonstration of what you can do with the loop pedal. It's quite fun. It's quite a lot you can do with the loop pedal. What do the other buttons on the loop pedal do? The other buttons are other loops. This is like quite a involved loop pedal. It's called a ditto by fours. There's 4 loops you can make. Loop 1, loop 2, and they each have multiple loops. You can layer it up, and then you can control the volume of the loops, and you can put effects on the loops as well. Half speed, reverse. Tape stops, my favorite one. So you can get a lot of different kinds of loop pedals. Some just do the loop and that's all. That one has effects as well, so it's like pretty it's not like the basic loop pedal. It's a more advanced, let's say, loop pedal. So that was all about guitar tone, amps, and loop pedals.